All right, in this video, we're going to be talking about uncomplicated firewall. And this firewall is just one of many that are out there. This one is the one that comes packaged with most Linux systems. But we're going to be using this really as just an example to kind of illustrate what a firewall is and how it can be used as a security mechanism for your host. Now, there's different types of firewalls as well. You can have like a host-based firewall. You can have a network-based firewall. And where those are basically deployed kind of determines what type of firewall it is. But in this case, we're strictly looking at like a host-based firewall. So this firewall is going to be running on one computer, on one machine, and it's going to restrict access only for that one machine. Now, what do I mean by restrict access? Well, let's say you have a web server running on one of your servers, and that web application that's running, let's say you don't want specific people, and by people I mean machines, specific machines to be able to access it, or maybe you don't want anybody to access it. Maybe you only want it to be local. A firewall is a layer of defense that can help you prevent certain access to your machine. And now that can be based off of a service, it can be based off certain ports, or again, it can be IP based, right? So you can restrict access based on IP addresses. But in this example, we're basically just going to show how to enable UFW, how to enable the firewall, and show an example of how restricting access via a certain port, how that may look, and yeah, we'll kind of demonstrate what it looks like before and what it looks like after. So let's just jump right into it. So what we have here is we have two machines. We have updated Kali. This is going to be our client machine, and we have Sentinel Sensor, which is going to be our server in this instance. Now, both of these are running on Kali Linux, so they will look the same a little bit. So just kind of keep an eye on the tabs up here of which one we're looking at. Also, you can look at the host name. This is the sensor, so this is where our server is going to be running. And then Kali for this host name is going to be our client system. So without further ado, we have on our server, we have used Python to basically spin up a simple web server. So we're just serving the current directory over port 80. Now, if I look at the IP address of this box, it is 192.168.1.34. So I'm just going to copy that, and we're going to try to access this web server from our client, aka our updated Kali machine. And I've actually already typed it in here, port 80. If I press enter, you'll see it loads the web directory just like this. And if we come back to our server, we can see where that IP address, this is our Kali client machine, sent a GET request to the root directory, and it returned a 200 response. So great. So we have access. We're able to access the web server. We're able to access all the things that this directory is currently serving up. Now, let's say, for instance, we are in a competition or we're in a real environment and we have been tasked with restricting access to this machine. So we don't want anybody, for the meantime, we'll kind of do multiple layers here or multiple steps. But for the first part, let's just look at how can we restrict access to where nobody can actually access this web server that's being hosted over port 80. Well, we can use UFW, as I mentioned before, to do that. So the first thing we're going to do with UFW is we're going to set default policies. And these are basically what we want to set up with these are our default for incoming and default for outgoing connections. So if there's no other rules, or if any of the data coming in doesn't match a certain role, it will adhere to whatever the default says. And so what we're going to do, I just copied these from my other window here, is we are going to, almost ran this on our client. We want to go to the server, and what we're going to do is we are going to deny. So what we're saying is we're using UFW, so the firewall. By default, we want to deny all incoming traffic. Now, this is actually really important, and this is kind of the deny by default is kind of a term that you may hear in the industry. Basically, what we're saying is we want to restrict access to everybody, to where nobody has access to our host or our services unless we specify otherwise, right? So we don't want to allow by default, because that would obviously be bad, right? We don't want just random people being able to connect in and access all of our things. So we're going to deny incoming by default. So I can run this command, and you'll see that the default incoming policy changed to deny. Now, on the other hand, maybe, and this could be configured different ways, but for this demonstration, just to show the opposite, we're going to set the default to allow for all outgoing traffic. So any traffic that we want on our system to go out, we're going to allow that to happen. All right, so this could actually be important too, and you may not want to allow all traffic going out of the system. For instance, maybe you have confidential data on here, or hey, only certain things, only certain ports or services should be used when it comes to data going out, right? Maybe because everything's allowed out, people who get access, maybe a hacker gets access to this machine, and they can exfiltrate data over various ports and services and that sort of thing because you're allowing all outgoing. Now, I'm just trying to paint an example. For this demonstration, again, though, we just wanted to allow all outgoing traffic just kind of as a default, and kind of an example of showing what the opposite of the deny by default for the incoming traffic looks like. All right, so we have denied all incoming traffic. So let's try to access the web server again. We're going to port 80. I pressed enter, nothing changed. We still have access. How is that? We denied all incoming traffic. Well, you actually have to enable the firewall. So to do that, you just use the sudo UFW enable command, and we will get a little prompt here that says firewall is active and enabled on the system startup. Okay, so now let's go back to our client and try to access this one more time and see what that looks like. You'll notice it's not refreshing immediately. In fact, it's kind of hanging, and that's because our firewall is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, and it's not allowing that traffic to flow from this client machine to this server. Now, obviously, if you had a legitimate client, you wouldn't want this, right? You would want the client to be able to access this data or this server. So our deny by default, though, this is just a demonstration showing how the deny by default now restricts access to this server, and you'll see it's still spinning up here. I know you can see the data, but that's just because we populated it previously, but this is still spinning, and that's because it's not actually completing that request. So now that we are a little bit more secure in the sense of nobody can access anything on this system because we're denying all, what if we did want to actually allow the HTTP web server service to be accessed, but we don't want anything else to be accessed? Well, because we did deny by default, we don't have to go through and say, hey, deny SSH, deny FTP, deny all these other things. We're denying everything, but now we can create kind of some exceptions to that deny all to allow certain things to come through. So let's do exactly that. We're going to set a new rule that says to allow port 80 TCP. Now, another way you can do this, because this is HTTP, which is the service. If you look here, this is the same thing as typing http:// by default. Port 80 will be trying to access over HTTP. If you're doing over secure, so if your normal browser, if you're accessing like google.com, for instance, you'll be going over HTTPS, which by default is configured to go over port 443. So just to show this one more time, you'll see nothing's loading, nothing's happening, and it's because we still have that rule in place. So let's go back to our server. And so we can say allow 80 TCP. The other option could be like UDP here, but this is going to go over TCP. But to make this more easy to read, I guess, we're going to do HTTP. So you could do either one, but just for demonstration purposes, let's do HTTP. I press enter, and it says there was a rule added. So now if we do sudo UFW status, you'll see the firewall is active, and we are allowing IPv4 and IPv6 access on port 80, right, from anywhere. We allowed all. So now let's go back to our Kali machine, our Kali client, And you'll see that this loaded instantly because we are now allowing this again. But let's say we actually didn't want that. Let's say we messed up and we want to delete that rule, or maybe we have a legacy rule that's no longer needed. What we can do is we can actually say, let's delete the allow on HTTP. So if we do that, you'll see 2 rules deleted, which is just the IPv4, IPv6 rules. And if we do the status, you'll notice nothing populated in the way that it did before. And that's because we removed those rules. There's nothing there. Now, again, if we try to load this page, it's going to hang and it's not going to load because now we're back to our deny all with 0 exceptions. All right, so we actually have some more fine granular controls that we can kind of put in place here. So let's say we do have legitimate access that's needed from this client, but we don't want it accessible to anybody, right? So we showed how you can add and delete rules for HTTP, but let's just say that we do want this client to be able to access it, but we don't want another client to be able to access it, or in fact, we don't want anybody else to access it. So by default, we have our deny all. So we're blocking access from everyone, but we can create a rule that says, hey, we're going to allow the one client through. So if we type, IP-ADDR in our client machine here that we do want to have access, here's the IP address. So I'm just going to copy that, move over to our server, and now we're going to do the allow HTTP, but we're going to say, we're going to add a from, and then we're going to add the IP address. Wrong number. Oh, sorry. I think I did the order wrong. Let's try that again. Oh, and I see. I actually have the order backwards here. So we actually want to say sudo UFW allow from. I'm going to paste that IP address in there again. Then we're going to put a space. We'll say proto HTTP. And sorry, it took me a second to get the elongated command here typed out. So excuse the jump there, but let's walk through what the command should be. UFW allow from the IP address that we are allowing our client to connect from. The protocol is TCP. Remember, that could be UDP or TCP. Proto TCP to any, so any destination host, and we're saying port 80. So what that's saying is basically allow, and let's just do the sudo UFW status again. It's kind of easier to see. So what we're saying is to allow data coming to port 80 from this IP address. All right, so let's go back to our client machine. And let's go 192.168.1.34, I believe it was, 80. You'll see we can access it just fine. And what we've done here is I've actually got another browser up, and we're going to try to do the same thing from our other browser here, our other, let's say, malicious user. And we'll see what that looks like. 192.168.1.34 or 80. And what you'll notice is we get this spinning again, and it does not connect. And the reason for that is, why? Well, it's because we have deny all by default, and then we have one exception that says allow this certain IP address. So you'll see how this can be used to restrict access to everybody, but also kind of allow some exceptions for your typical business needs. Now, more commonly, what you'll actually see, instead of just one IP address, you could see this, but it could be, maybe you only allow from internal IP addresses, or maybe only a certain subnet of IP addresses and that sort of thing. But I hope that this example kind of shows you how you can add rules in to restrict access while also allowing certain services to be served up on your host machine in a more secure way.